She truly believed she was about to destroy him. She felt so certain, so incredibly confident, that this older Louisiana senator would simply collapse under her forceful critique. She'd chosen her target with care, practiced her words, and worked with her gallery supporters. This was destined to be her big moment. The viral clip that would solidify her as the brave, progressive voice for truth. What Ilhan Omar didn't know, what she couldn't possibly have known, was that John Kennedy had spent months preparing for this exact moment. He'd been patiently waiting, gathering documents, building a folder so devastating it could end her entire career in just one afternoon. There were 127 pieces of evidence. Emails she thought were gone, audio she didn't know existed, and financial records that painted a picture of fraud and corruption stretching back years. But we'll get to that folder. And trust me, you're going to want to see what's inside. If you're new here, hit subscribe so you don't miss how this satisfying takedown ends. First, let me set the scene for you. It was just a routine hearing for the House Foreign Affairs Committee. Nothing particularly special was on the agenda, just another typical day in Washington. Omar had requested special questioning privileges beforehand. She told the chairman her intent was to discuss refugee policy. What she really wanted was a viral moment, a clip of her destroying a Republican that would be shown on every news network and trend on social media for days. She picked Kennedy because he seemed like an easy target. He was 72 years old, soft-spoken, with that slow Louisiana drawl that coastal elites loved to mock. He looked like someone's grandpa who just stumbled into the wrong building, honestly. That was her first big mistake. She walked into that hearing room like she owned the place. Her designer hijab caught the television lights, she was finger-pointing, and her voice was rising. The gallery was packed with her supporters, ready to cheer her on to victory. "You represent everything wrong with America's past," she shouted at Kennedy. "The shameful legacy of prejudice against immigrants and Muslims." The gallery erupted then, with applause, cheers, and waving signs. And Kennedy? He just sat there, taking notes on his legal pad. He had a slight smile on his face, like he was enjoying a private joke that no one else quite understood yet. Omar kept going. She was really on a roll now. "Senator Kennedy, you sit there in your expensive suit with your Southern drawl, pretending to care about human rights. Your entire career has been built on excluding people like me from the American dream." More cheers, more applause. Reporters were typing furiously, already writing headlines about Kennedy's public humiliation. "You've never known struggle. You've never fled your homeland. You've never spent years in a refugee camp. What could you possibly know about the refugee experience?" She paused for dramatic effect, soaking it all in. This was going exactly according to plan. What Omar didn't notice, what no one noticed, was Kennedy's folder. It had been sitting there the whole time, closed, just waiting. A plain manila folder, thick with documents. Nothing special about it from the outside, but inside was everything Kennedy needed to totally destroy her. Immigration records, tax returns, emails, audio recordings, sworn affidavits, financial disclosures, literally everything. When Omar finally stopped talking, Kennedy looked up. And here's the key thing about John Kennedy that most people just don't understand. That folksy demeanor, that "aw, shucks" Louisiana charm, it's absolutely genuine. But underneath it all is one of the sharpest legal minds in the Senate. He's a man who spent decades as a prosecutor and attorney before ever entering politics. A man who knows exactly how to build a case and precisely when to spring the trap. Omar had just walked into a trap. and she had no idea. "Thank you for that passionate speech, ma'am," Kennedy said, each word slow, measured, and wrapped in Southern courtesy. "You raise important points about understanding different experiences." He paused. "And speaking of experiences, perhaps we should explore yours a bit more thoroughly." Then he opened the folder. The room fell silent. Something in Kennedy's tone had shifted. The reporters stopped typing altogether. Omar's confident smile flickered for just a moment. "You mentioned building a life from nothing in America," Kennedy continued, pulling out a document. "Let's discuss how you built that life. Specifically, let's talk about your marriage in 2009. Omar's confident expression completely froze. "My personal life has nothing to do with—" "Oh, but it does, ma'am." Kennedy's voice was gentle, almost kind. "You see, questions have been raised about this particular marriage to Mr. Ahmed Noor Saeed Elmi." He looked up at her. "Your brother." And that's when everything completely changed. The room exploded. Omar's supporters were shouting lies, Islamophobia, and conspiracy theory. But Kennedy just sat there, calm, patient, waiting for the noise to die down. He'd expected this reaction. He'd planned for it all along. Omar was shaking her head. "That's a disgusting conspiracy theory that has been thoroughly debunked." "Has it?" Two words spoken softly, but they cut through the chaos like a knife. Kennedy pulled out another document. "Because I have here educational records from the United Kingdom, and they show Mr. Elmi attended school there. And, ma'am, they list the same father's name that appears on your refugee documents." The shouting was getting quieter now. People were actually starting to listen carefully. "I have sworn affidavits from 6 members of the Minneapolis Somali community, all confirming the family relationship. One of them, Mrs. Fadumo Hassan, knew your family in Somalia before you fled. She's quite specific about who Mr. Elmi really is." Kennedy laid another document on the table. "And most interesting of all," he paused, letting the anticipation build, "I have records showing that you, your cultural husband, Ahmed Hersi, and your legal husband, Mr. Elmi, all lived at the same address in Columbia Heights, Minnesota." Silence. Complete silence. Let me explain why this truly matters. Omar had 2 men in her life. Ahmed Hersi, the father of her children, the man she had an Islamic faith marriage with, and Ahmed Elmi, the man she legally married in 2009. If Elmi was just a husband, why were all 3 of them living together? Kennedy smiled that gentle smile. "Now, ma'am, in most cultures, it's pretty unusual for a woman to live with both her husband and her brother. It's even more unusual when she's legally married to the brother, but filing taxes jointly with the other man." He pulled out tax returns. "These are from 2014 and 2015. You filed jointly with Mr. Hersi while being legally married to Mr. Elmi." He looked up. "That's tax fraud. But more importantly, if Mr. Elmi is your brother, we're looking at immigration fraud, a federal crime." Omar's hands were gripping the table now, knuckles white. "These are fabricated documents. This is nothing but a racist attack." "Ma'am," Kennedy's voice was patient, almost pitying. "Math isn't Islamophobic. DNA isn't racist." Then he pulled out the document he'd been saving, the one that would change absolutely everything. "This is an email exchange between you and Mr. Elmi from 2011, retrieved from government servers through a FOIA request." Omar's face went pale. "You thought it was deleted, but government servers have long memories." Kennedy began to read slowly, letting each word land perfectly. "Thanks for helping me get papers, sister. I'll make sure to pay you back when I get to London." He looked up. "That's from Mr. Elmi to you, ma'am." And here's your response." The room was absolutely silent. "No need to pay back. Family helps family. Just be careful and delete these emails." The words hung heavily in the air. Someone in the gallery gasped out loud. A Democratic committee member muttered something that the microphones picked up. It definitely wasn't appropriate for television. A staffer dropped her phone, and the sound echoed in the sudden silence. "Thanks for helping me get papers, sister," Kennedy repeated slowly, deliberately, letting each word really sink in. Not wife, sister. He let that word just hang in the air. Sister, not a term of endearment, not a cultural expression, a literal description of their relationship. Brother and sister. And she had married him to help him get immigration papers. One of the Democratic committee members quietly removed her "I stand with Ilhan" pin, placing it face down on the desk. She couldn't even look at Omar anymore, it seemed. Others were frantically checking their phones, trying to figure out how to distance themselves from what was rapidly unfolding. Omar looked around the room, searching for friendly faces, but finding fewer and fewer by the second. Kennedy organized his papers with methodical precision. "But we're just getting started, ma'am. Shall we continue?" He pulled out the next section of his folder. "I think the committee would be very interested in your campaign finance activities, particularly your relationship with Mr. Tim Minette." Omar's face told the whole story. Whatever color was left completely drained away. She had no idea how truly bad this was about to get for her. When the committee reconvened after a brief recess, the room looked different, noticeably so. Half the Democratic seats were now empty. The chairs sat there like silent accusations. The progressive activists who had arrived before dawn to cheer Omar's victory, they were filing out quietly now, removing their solidarity hijabs as they went, deleting the tweets they'd already drafted, celebrating her triumph. The mainstream media reporters were rewriting their stories. The headlines about Kennedy's humiliation had quickly become headlines about Omar's destruction. Omar returned, flanked by 2 attorneys now. Expensive suits, grim faces. They looked like men who knew they were about to watch a car crash and couldn't do anything at all to stop it. Her earlier confidence was completely gone, replaced by the hunted look of someone who knew the worst was still yet to come. And it was. Kennedy opened a new section of his folder, labeled in neat typescript, "Campaign Finance." "Now, ma'am, let's discuss your relationship with Mr. Tim Minette." Here's what you need to understand about Tim Minette. He ran a political consulting firm called E Street Group, and according to Federal Election Commission records, Omar's campaign paid his company $370,000 between 2018 and 2019. During this same period, Omar was having an affair with him. "My personal relationships are not. They are when campaign funds are involved," Kennedy interrupted sharply. "But let's let someone else tell the story for a moment." He pulled out a thick document. "This is the divorce deposition of Mrs. Beth Minette, Tim's wife, given under oath in D.C. Superior Court." Kennedy began reading. "My husband told me in April 2019 that he was having an affair with Congresswoman Omar. When I asked how they could afford all this travel, he said," Kennedy looked up at Omar, "Don't worry about it. Ilhan's campaign is covering everything." The room was silent. Even the reporters had stopped typing. "But that's just the wife's word, right?" Kennedy said, almost rhetorically. "Except I have the receipts to prove it." He laid them out on the table. "Romantic dinners for 2 in Nice, France. Billed to Omar for Congress. A couple's spa retreat in Napa Valley. Campaign funds. Hotel suites with 1 bed in cities where no campaign events were scheduled. all paid for by Minnesota donors who thought they were supporting progressive values. Omar tried to speak up. Those were legitimate campaign. Kennedy pulled out his phone, connecting it to the audio system. This is a text message from Mr. Minette to his wife, recorded during their divorce proceedings. A man's voice filled the room. "Stop calling me about money. I told you Ilhan's campaign is paying for everything now. Just be patient until the divorce is final." One of Omar's own staffers put her head in her hands, utterly defeated. "Paying for everything," Kennedy repeated slowly. "Interesting language for legitimate political consulting, wouldn't you say?" He wasn't done yet, not even close. "After you married Mr. Minette in 2020, did the payments stop?" He pulled out more FEC records. "Oh, no. They actually increased significantly. Your campaign paid your new husband's company $1.1 million that year alone, making him one of the highest-paid political consultants in America." Kennedy leaned back slightly in his chair. "Where I come from in Louisiana, using campaign funds to enrich your lover and then your spouse, that's what we call conversion of campaign funds for personal use. It's also a federal crime, by the way." He pulled out one more receipt with a slight smirk. "But my favorite is this one here. You used $6,000 in campaign funds to pay your divorce attorney. The divorce from Mr. Elmy, your brother, remember? So you could marry Mr. Minette instead." He looked directly at Omar, his gaze piercing. "Campaign donors unknowingly funded your transition from immigration fraud to campaign finance fraud. It's almost poetic in its corruption, really." Omar tried one last desperate defense. "This is politically motivated. You're trying to silence a strong woman of color." "Ma'am?" Kennedy's voice carried a note of genuine disgust for the very first time. "Fraud isn't a cultural practice, you know. Stealing isn't a religious belief. And crime doesn't suddenly become legal just because a woman of color commits it." He paused, letting his words sink in. "You've dishonored every legitimate refugee who came to this country honestly. Every woman who earned her position without corruption. Every Muslim who practices their faith without hiding behind it when caught breaking the law." The committee room was now in complete disarray, a chaotic scene. But Kennedy wasn't done. Not even close. "We haven't even gotten to your anti-Semitic statements yet," he said, reaching for the next section of his folder. "Those are particularly illuminating, believe me." And then there was the matter of September 11th, but we'll get to that in due time. We're only halfway through Kennedy's folder here, folks. And what's coming next is even more devastating than what we've heard so far. If you're enjoying watching Omar's downfall, hit that like button right now. It really helps more people see this story. Kennedy's demeanor shifted significantly as he opened the next section. The gentle mockery was completely gone, replaced by something much harder, much more serious now. It was the demeanor of a prosecutor about to present crucial evidence in a capital case. "Now, ma'am, we need to discuss your statements about Jewish Americans." He pulled out a printed screenshot of a tweet. "February 2019, you tweeted, 'It's all about the Benjamin's baby.' When asked who you thought was paying American politicians to be pro-Israel, you responded, AIPAC." Omar's lawyers whispered urgently to her, trying to advise her. "I apologized for that tweet." "After enormous pressure from your own party, you mean," Kennedy interrupted, not missing a beat. "But here's what you didn't apologize for, ever." He held up another page. "This is a deleted tweet from January 2019. You wrote, 'AIPAC owns Congress. They buy politicians like groceries. Time to expose the puppet masters.'" Gasps echoed through the room, a collective shock. Puppet masters, Kennedy repeated slowly, emphasizing the words. Jews as shadowy controllers, pulling strings behind the scenes. One of the oldest anti-Semitic images in existence, I might add. He pulled out an audio recorder, holding it up. But tweets can be dismissed as poor word choice, can't they? So, let me play you something from a private fundraiser in Minneapolis, back in March 2019. One of your donors was so disturbed by what they heard that they actually recorded it for posterity. He pressed play, and Omar's voice suddenly filled the committee room. The Jewish members of Congress, they can't be trusted on anything related to the Middle East. They have divided loyalties. They put Israel first, America second. We need to watch them carefully and counter their influence. The recording continued, each sentence somehow worse than the last one. When it finally finished, 2 Jewish committee members stood up and quietly walked out. One was visibly wiping tears from her eyes, overcome. Dual loyalty accusations, Kennedy said quietly, his voice heavy. The very same accusations used to justify pogroms in Russia, the Dreyfus affair in France, and yes, even the Holocaust in Germany. He leaned forward, his expression intense. Your own Jewish Democratic colleagues have tried to work with you for years, patiently. They've educated you about these harmful tropes. They've begged you, pleaded with you, to stop, and every single time you apologize publicly, and then you double down in private. He shook his head, a look of disappointment on his face. This isn't ignorance, ma'am. This is pure hatred. The remaining progressive supporters in the gallery had gone completely silent. Their earlier enthusiasm evaporated. But the worst was still yet to come. Believe me. Kennedy reached for the thickest section of his folder yet, his expression growing even more grim. Because all of this, the fraud, the corruption, the hatred, it all comes together in your most famous statement, the one that truly defines you. He looked directly at Omar, his gaze unwavering. Let's talk about September 11th, shall we? Kennedy's entire demeanor completely transformed then. The folksy charm vanished completely. The Southern courtesy disappeared without a trace. What remained was cold, precise, deadly serious, an almost chilling presence. It was the face of a man about to deliver a verdict that had been 20 years in the making. He looked up at the gallery, a solemn glance. In the front row sat a group of people wearing pins, each pin displaying photographs, faces of sons and daughters, husbands and wives, mothers and fathers, loved ones they'd tragically lost on September 11th, 2001. They had come to Washington specifically for this moment, for this reckoning. They had waited over 20 long years for it to arrive. Before we continue, I want to acknowledge the 9/11 families who are here today, Kennedy said quietly, his voice respectful. I know this will be difficult to hear, but America truly needs to understand exactly who sits in our Congress today. He turned back to Omar, his gaze firm. Her face had gone pale at the mere mention of 9/11. It was clear she knew what was coming next. She had to know, didn't she? In March 2019, you gave a speech at a care honors fundraising event, and you said something that revealed exactly who you are, exactly what you truly think about the worst attack on American soil since Pearl Harbor. Kennedy connected a tablet to the committee's screens, preparing to play the video. Omar's lawyers tried frantically to object, but the chairman quickly overruled them. The video played then, showing Omar at a podium, a cheering crowd behind her. Her voice filled the committee room, clear and distinct. KR was founded after 9/11 because they recognized that some people did something and that all of us were starting to lose access to our civil liberties. Kennedy paused the video, letting the words hang in the air. Let me make sure you understand what she just said there, very clearly. 2,977 Americans died on September 11th, murdered by Islamic terrorists in a coordinated attack on our nation. And Ilhan Omar described it as, "Some people did something, like it was a minor incident, not even worth describing accurately or seriously." Kennedy let the silence stretch for a long, uncomfortable moment. "Some people," he said finally, his voice cutting through the quiet. "Not terrorists. Some people. And they did something. Not murdered thousands of innocent Americans, just did something. Is that correct?" He pulled out printed screenshots now, authenticated with digital signatures from forensic experts. "But maybe that was just poor word choice on your part, right? Maybe she misspoke. Maybe in the heat of the moment, she simply chose her words badly." He held up the pages, his expression grim. "These are your WhatsApp messages from 2019, sent after your 'some people' comment generated a lot of controversy. Private messages you sent to a group chat with political activists, for all to see." He paused for emphasis, allowing the tension to build. The room was absolutely silent, every ear straining to hear. "You wrote," he read slowly, deliberately, each word clearly enunciated, "The American obsession with 9/11 is useful. Use their guilt against them. Every time they question us, bring up Islamophobia. Make them feel bad for their reaction rather than the attack itself." Let that sink in for a moment, ladies and gentlemen. He paused again. She called it useful, the murder of nearly 3,000 Americans. Useful. A political tool, she said, a way to manipulate grieving families into silence, into submission. The committee room suddenly erupted in chaos. Even Democrats couldn't remain silent any longer. One shouted, "That's unconscionable," before quickly catching himself, horrified. Another had her head buried in her hands, shaking. "Use their guilt against them," Kennedy repeated, his voice firm. He looked directly at the 9/11 families, his eyes filled with empathy. "You saw the murder of their loved ones as a political tool, a way to manipulate grieving families into quietness." In the gallery, a man stood up, his voice shaking with raw rage, his pain evident. "My daughter died in the North Tower. She was 23 years old. She was not a statistic, Senator." Kennedy raised a hand gently, a gesture for calm. "Sir, I understand your pain, truly. Please, just let me finish what I need to say." He turned back to Omar, his gaze hardening. "This is from your FBI security clearance review, ma'am. Do you know what you told the agents during that review?" Omar was silent, her face ashen, completely drained of color. "You said American foreign policy is the real terrorism. What happened on 9/11 was chickens coming home to roost, you claimed." Capitol Police officers in the room visibly stiffened at his words, their expressions grim. "You told federal agents that America deserved 9/11. That we had it coming." Kennedy stood up then, to his full height. At that moment, the elderly senator seemed to completely fill the room with his presence. "Representative Omar," he said, his voice ringing out, "thousands of Americans died that day. Christians, Jews, Muslims, Hindus, atheists, every walk of life. Among the dead were Muslim first responders, by the way, who bravely ran into those burning buildings to save others, to help." His voice rose for the first time, a note of controlled anger now present. "You dishonor their memory every single time you refuse to call their killers what they truly were. Terrorists." He pulled out a final document, holding it up for all to see. "This came to my office this morning. directly from the Director of National Intelligence. The room went completely still, all eyes on Kennedy. Based on the overwhelming evidence presented today, your security clearance is being immediately revoked, effective right now. You will no longer have access to classified briefings of any kind. You cannot serve on any committee dealing with national security issues, period. Omar's lawyers jumped up, shouting objections loudly, but Kennedy simply spoke over them, his voice firm and unwavering. Your career in Congress is definitively over, ma'am. Not because of your religion or your race or your gender, no, but because you're a fraud, a thief, and a terrorist sympathizer who somehow managed to con your way into the United States Congress itself. The 9/11 families were standing now, applauding through their tears, a powerful, emotional display. The Southern gentleman had delivered the ultimate kill shot, a devastating blow. Omar made one last, desperate attempt to regain control. She stood up shakily, gripping the table for support, her hands trembling. "This is McCarthyism!" she cried, her voice rising in anguish. "A witch hunt to silence a strong Muslim woman? Nothing more!" Kennedy looked at her with something like genuine pity in his eyes, a somber expression. "Ma'am, Joe McCarthy made accusations without any evidence whatsoever, you know." He gestured pointedly to the towering mountain of documents now piled on the table before him. "I, on the other hand, have 127 pieces of documented evidence right here. Financial records, emails, audio recordings, sworn testimony, government documents, the works." He shook his head slowly, a solemn gesture. "This isn't McCarthyism, ma'am. This is pure accountability, finally." His phone buzzed softly in his pocket. He glanced down at it, a slight, almost imperceptible smile crossing his face. "Speaking of accountability, if you'll indulge me for a moment," he said, his voice calm, "a statement just came in from Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez." The room went quiet once more, anticipating what he would read. Kennedy read from his phone, his voice clear. "I am shocked by the revelations about Representative Omar. I cannot and will not defend fraud, corruption, or anti-Semitism under any circumstances. She has betrayed the progressive movement and must resign immediately." He paused. "AOC." Omar gasped audibly, a sound of utter shock and defeat. "The entire squad has abandoned you, ma'am," Kennedy stated matter-of-factly, his voice devoid of emotion. The speaker system crackled to life, an official announcement cutting through the air. "Attention! By order of the Director of National Intelligence, Representative Ilhan Omar's security clearance has been revoked, effective immediately." Capitol police officers entered the room swiftly, moving towards Omar. "Representative Omar, we need to escort you to surrender your security credentials right now." Omar turned back one last time, her face twisted with a mixture of rage and tears, her voice barely a whisper. "This isn't over. You hear me?" "No, ma'am," Kennedy said quietly, his voice calm and steady. He didn't even look up from packing his documents away carefully. "It's over, believe me. You're completely done." As Omar was led away, still screaming about persecution and injustice, Kennedy finished organizing his papers with meticulous care. He nodded politely to the chairman, a brief, respectful gesture, and then tipped an imaginary hat to the 9/11 families, a silent acknowledgement. Then he walked out, with the same quiet dignity and composure with which he had entered the room hours earlier. Later that evening, Kennedy gave one interview, and only one, to a local Louisiana station, nothing national or flashy. He didn't want the spotlight, it seemed. He sat on his porch in Madisonville, looking out over the bayou, the peaceful scene a stark contrast to the day's events. The setting sun painted the water a vibrant gold and orange. Spanish moss hung gracefully from the cypress trees. It was a long way indeed from the chaos and intensity of that Washington hearing room. "I don't take any pleasure in what happened today. Not really," he said in that slow, familiar drawl of his. "I know some folks might think I enjoyed it, that little smile everyone keeps talking about. But watching someone destroy their own life through greed and hatred is never pleasant. Not truly. It never is." He paused, taking a slow sip of something, probably sweet tea, a moment of reflection. "But sometimes you have to lance a boil to heal the body, you see. Congress had an infection, a deep one. It had been festering for years, quietly eating away at things. Today, we began the treatment, a necessary one." The interviewer then asked if he had any regrets about the day's events. Kennedy considered the question carefully, as was his nature, the way he considered absolutely everything in life. "My only regret, truly, is that it took this long for things to come to light. How many people were hurt by her fraud while we waited patiently? How many Jews were wounded by her hateful words, over and over again? How many Muslims were embarrassed by her actions, which certainly didn't represent them? How many 9/11 families had to watch her minimize their profound loss, time and time again?" He shook his head slowly, a look of sadness on his face. "If we'd acted sooner, perhaps less damage would have been done to everyone involved. But we're here now, and justice, I believe, was finally served today." The setting sun reflected beautifully off the bayou water, creating a serene glow. "You know," Kennedy said quietly, his voice thoughtful, "this country gave that woman everything she could possibly want. Refuge from war, a good education, endless opportunity, even high office in our government." He looked directly into the camera, his gaze steady and unwavering. "And she repaid it all with lies and hatred. Nothing more." A long pause followed, the silence speaking volumes. But, in the end, the system worked, as it should. Truth ultimately won out, as it always does. He smiled that gentle Southern smile again, a genuine, hopeful expression. And that, my friends, is the America I still deeply believe in. Within hours of the hearing's dramatic conclusion, the political earthquake it caused sent shockwaves across the entire country. The Minnesota Democratic Party publicly called for Omar's resignation before the sun had even set that day. Muslim members of Congress swiftly condemned her actions and statements. Her own constituents, the Somali Americans she had claimed to represent, protested angrily outside her Minneapolis office, holding signs reading, "She does not represent us," and "Fraud is not our culture." The FBI immediately opened investigations into immigration fraud, tax fraud, and campaign finance violations, a comprehensive probe. The IRS began reviewing years of her tax returns meticulously. The Federal Election Commission launched an expedited review of every payment made to Tim Manette's various companies. Omar, for her part, released a defiant statement through her lawyers. She called it a witch hunt and a politically motivated attack on a strong Muslim woman. She vehemently said she would not resign, would not be silenced, but it didn't really matter anymore, not at that point. Her party had abandoned her completely. Her security clearance was gone for good. Her allies had fled, leaving her isolated. Her career was utterly over, finished. She just didn't want to admit it to herself yet, perhaps. John Kennedy had done more than simply destroy a corrupt politician that day. He had reminded Washington and the nation that facts still matter deeply, that evidence still counts for everything, and that no one, no matter their identity or ideology, is truly above the law of the land. The Southern gentleman had delivered justice with courtesy, with irrefutable facts, and with devastating effectiveness. The reckoning, finally, was complete. And that, dear friends, is the powerful story of how a Southern gentleman, armed with a folder full of undeniable facts, brought down one of the most protected politicians in Washington. If this story gave you any satisfaction at all, please drop a comment telling me which moment hit the hardest for you. Was it the sister email, the campaign finance revelations, or the chilling 9/11 messages? Like this video if you enjoyed it. Subscribe if you haven't already. And I'll see you all in the next one very soon.